You cannot
Young
go back
Omega
there. It is a
whispered, "Can I
trap.
sleep by your gate?" But the Alpha King said,
My
"No,
brother is
you
still
belong
inside. I have
beside
to
me."
try.
In the distance, the towering castle of King Kalen rose above the land, its spires piercing the evening sky. The people of Eldrath whispered of the Alpha King who ruled it, a man of unmatched power, whose shadow could silence armies and whose gaze could pierce the soul. Yet no one truly knew him. The stories painted him as cold, unyielding, bound by a curse that had lasted generations. Beyond the walls, at the edge of the forest, a young Omega named Lysandra crouched among the tall grass. Her small frame shivered as the wind tugged at her cloak. She was orphaned when the war had swept through her village years ago, leaving her to navigate a world that feared her gentle kind. Yet, something about the castle drew her night after night. Perhaps it was the pull of its great gates, or perhaps it was the feeling that she was meant to be closer to the man within than anyone else could ever imagine. Each night she whispered into the cold air, barely audible, "Can I sleep by your gate?" The words felt like a secret between herself and the wind, a fragile confession to a figure she had never truly met. Tonight, the air seemed heavier, darker. Shadows lengthened unnaturally across the road leading to the castle gates. Lysandra's heart beat faster, and a strange warmth filled her chest. She had been there countless nights before, but something told her that tonight would be different. From the towers above, Kalen watched. Cloaked in midnight, his presence was more shadow than man. His piercing eyes had followed her for nights now, though he had remained unseen. He had sensed her arrival long before she stepped into the field, and yet, despite centuries of ruling and guarding against weakness, he felt an unfamiliar tug at his heart. Lysandra's whisper reached him like a fragile melody, delicate and haunting. "Can I sleep by your gate?" Kalen descended, silent as the mist itself, until he stood just behind the young Omega. The sudden shadow made her startle, her breath catching in her throat. She turned slowly, her gaze meeting the king's. For a moment, the world held its breath. "You," Kalen's voice was low, a rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very stones of the castle. He studied her, the way her small hands trembled, the way her eyes reflected the dim starlight. "You are far from home." I just," Lysandra faltered. She felt the pull of something powerful, something dangerous. I wanted to sleep by your gate, just for a moment." Kalen's face remained unreadable, yet something softened within his eyes. His long fingers brushed the hilt of the sword at his side instinctively, not in threat but in caution. "No," he said, his voice firm yet strange, almost tender. "You belong beside me." The words hung in the cold night air. Lysandra's heart stumbled. She wanted to speak, to question, yet fear rooted her to the spot. The king turned, and before she could respond, he vanished into the shadows of the castle as if he were part of the darkness itself. Lysandra remained frozen, the echo of his words resounding in her mind. "Beside him," she whispered, unsure if she dared to hope. Yet even as the wind whispered back, she felt the walls of the castle pulse with unseen life, as if the stones themselves acknowledged her presence. The next evening, Lysandra returned. Her steps were quieter now, deliberate, as though she were treading into the heart of a dream. The gate loomed above her, ancient and carved with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Each rune pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, and the air hummed with magic that was older than Eldrath itself. From the shadows, Kalen watched once again. He had sensed the threads of destiny weaving between them, fragile and luminous. Yet he feared for her. He feared the curse that lingered in his blood, a dark inheritance that had claimed those who drew too near in the past. Still, he could not turn away. There was something about Lysandra that stirred a part of him he had thought long dead. That night he allowed her to sit at the edge of the gate, near enough that he could see her clearly but far enough to protect her from the unseen dangers that lurked beyond the walls. The air between them was charged, neither speaking, both aware of the unspoken bond forming. The stars above seemed to lean closer, as though even the heavens were curious about this connection. "Why do you come here?" Kalen finally asked, his voice softer this time, almost like a whisper meant for her ears alone. Lysandra tilted her head. I don't know. I feel safe here, and yet not just safe, I feel like I'm meant to be here." Kalen's eyes darkened. He sensed the truth in her words, the quiet courage that lived within her. "You do not know the dangers," he murmured. "This place, this crown, it is not kind to those who are gentle." "I am not afraid," she said, her voice barely above the rustle of the wind. "Not of you, not anymore." The king's gaze softened imperceptibly, though his shadow still loomed large. For centuries, no one had dared to speak to him like that, not with honesty, not with heart. Lysandra's courage was both a light and a threat, illuminating something within him that he had long tried to hide. Suddenly, the air shifted. A chill wind swept across the field, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers. Kalen tensed instantly. Shadows began to stir along the edges of the forest, moving with purpose, unnatural and menacing. He stepped in front of Lysandra, a protective silhouette against the encroaching darkness. "They come," he said, his voice hardening. "The curse, it is restless tonight." Lysandra's hand reached out, brushing against his cloak. "Then I will face it with you," she whispered, though her heart hammered with fear. Kalen looked down at her, the storm of centuries in his eyes. He wanted to take her in his arms, to shield her completely, but he also knew that to draw closer could mean destruction. Yet the thought of leaving her alone, alone in the shadows of the night, was unbearable. A figure emerged from the trees, a dark wraith with eyes that glowed like embers, silent but deadly. Lysandra stumbled back, and Kalen moved with a grace that was almost otherworldly. He raised his hand, and the shadows recoiled from the light that seemed to radiate from him. The wraith hissed, a sound like ice breaking on a frozen lake, and retreated just enough to strike again. Kalen's power surged, the air around him vibrating with energy. He sent a wave of force toward the wraith, banishing it into the night. Lysandra watched, breathless, heart pounding, not with fear but with awe. She realized in that moment that the man who had once seemed untouchable was now showing her both his strength and his vulnerability. When the last shadow dissipated, Kalen turned toward her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something unspoken. "Do you understand now?" he asked, voice low, almost gentle. "Why you cannot merely sleep by my gate?" "Yes," she whispered, the words trembling on her lips. "I understand." Kalen's shadow stretched across the field as he stepped closer. "You belong beside me," he repeated, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Lysandra's heart swelled with a mix of fear and longing. She wanted to speak, to step into his arms, yet something restrained her. The night air was thick with tension, as if the very world held its breath for what would come next. Suddenly, a faint echo of movement stirred in the distance, a whisper of danger, a sign that the curse that bound Kalen was far from dormant. Lysandra's pulse quickened, and she realized that her connection to the Alpha King was no longer just a matter of desire or fate, it was a matter of survival. Kalen's eyes flickered to the darkness beyond the field. "You must leave now," he said, though the words were heavy with reluctance. "But know this, you are already part of what binds me. The night has claimed you as it has claimed me." Lysandra nodded slowly, feeling the weight of destiny settle over her shoulders like a cloak. She turned to leave, but one glance back at the king left her breathless. He was watching her still, a figure carved from shadow and light, his presence both terrifying and magnetic. As she disappeared into the mist, the faint whisper of a shadowed figure moved at the edge of the forest, an omen that the night was far from over, and that the bond between the young Omega and the Alpha King would soon be tested in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The gates of the castle stood silent, watching, waiting, as the first hints of dawn painted the sky. And somewhere within the walls, Kalen remained, thinking of the young Omega who had dared to speak to him, who had dared to linger beside the darkness, and who had already begun to change him in ways the curse had never allowed. The world of Eldrath held its breath, and the night whispered promises of power, longing, and a destiny that could not be denied. The dawn broke over Eldrath like liquid gold spilling across the hills, but within the castle walls, the world remained shadowed and quiet. King Kaelin moved through the corridors silently, as if the stones themselves whispered his name in reverence and fear. Though the sunlight touched the spires above, it could not penetrate the darkness that lingered in his heart. Centuries of curse and solitude had carved deep lines into his soul, lines that even power could not erase. Yet, he could not stop thinking of Lysandra. The young Omega had walked beside danger and dared to speak to him as no one had in a lifetime. He had felt the warmth of her presence seep into his chest, a strange, tender ache he neither understood nor wanted to name. But the curse that haunted him was no idle threat. One wrong move, and her courage could be swallowed by the shadows he carried within. By midday, Lysandra returned to the outskirts of the castle, careful not to draw notice from the guards. She could not explain why she felt compelled to come here again, why the pull of the king's presence called to her like a faint heartbeat in the dark. Perhaps it was destiny, or perhaps it was the strange connection she felt in her dreams, dreams where the shadow of the castle seemed to reach out, wrapping her in safety and fear all at once. Kaelin had anticipated her return. From the high towers he watched her approach, cloaked in the soft light of day. He stayed hidden, hesitant to reveal himself. The last night had proven dangerous. The shadows had stirred, and though he had protected her, the thought of the curse overwhelming her filled him with unease. Lysandra reached the edge of the castle grounds and crouched among the stones, her eyes scanning the towers for any sign of the king. She whispered into the wind, her voice trembling with hope. "Are you there?" From the shadows, Kaelin stepped forward, though his presence remained softened, deliberate, almost cautious. "I am," he replied, his voice a low murmur that seemed to flow with the wind. "Do you not fear me?" I am not afraid," she answered, her gaze steady. "Not of you." Kaelin studied her. There was bravery in her words, yet also an innocence that made his chest tighten. How could someone so gentle stand beside the darkness he carried? And yet she did, unflinching, as if the shadows themselves bent to her courage. For the first time, Kaelin allowed himself a small gesture. He left a single token beside her, a feather, black as midnight yet glimmering with a faint silver sheen. Lysandra bent down and picked it up, turning it over in her hands. She could feel the subtle hum of magic radiating from it, a warmth meant only for her. "This is from you?" she asked softly. Kaelin did not answer immediately. He only watched her, the faintest shadow of a smile brushing his lips. "A message," he said finally, "a sign that the darkness is not all there is." Lysandra's heart swelled. In that simple act she felt a connection stronger than words could convey. She wanted to speak, to ask the questions that crowded her mind, yet something in Kaelin's posture held her back. The king's power was not just in his form or his shadow. It radiated from him like the pulse of the world itself, demanding respect, awe, and fear. As the day turned to dusk, Lysandra found herself moving closer to the castle walls, drawn by an invisible thread. Kaelin, ever watchful, decided to meet her, but not as a shadow in the night this time. He stepped from the courtyard into the fading light, his cloak trailing behind him like smoke. "You risk much by being here," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "Not all shadows can be controlled, and some will seek to claim you." "I can face them," Lysandra replied, her voice soft but resolute. "With you I feel stronger." Kaelin's heart faltered. That single word, stronger, stirred something he had buried long ago. Power, fear, and loneliness had shaped him for centuries, but no one had ever given him such courage merely by standing near him. He wanted to believe that she could endure the dangers that came with his life, and yet the thought of losing her, of allowing the curse to touch her, terrified him. The first shadows arrived before the night fully settled. They came as whispers and shapes at the edges of the forest, dark wraiths born of the old curse that had haunted Kaelin's bloodline. Lysandra froze for a moment, but Kaelin's hand reached for hers, steady and commanding. "Stay close," he said. His eyes blazed, the faint glow of ancient power surfacing beneath his shadowed gaze. "Do not falter." The wraiths hissed and slithered forward like smoke, testing the bond between Alpha and Omega. Kaelin's form seemed to grow taller, larger, his aura filling the field. He moved with an elegance that belied his lethal power, and every movement of his hand sent the creatures retreating in fear. Lysandra watched, awestruck, as the Alpha King became a force of both protection and grace. Her pulse raced, not from fear, but from a strange thrill she had never known. She realized in that moment that the bond between them was no longer simple curiosity or fascination. It was deeper, a tether of trust and destiny woven through their souls. When the last wraith was driven back into the forest, Lysandra exhaled a trembling sigh. You saved me again." Kaelin's eyes softened, though the lingering shadows in his gaze reminded her of the danger that always lingered. "It is not enough to save you," he said. "I must protect you, and yet even protection comes at a price." I don't care," she whispered, brushing her hand against his cloak. "I would face the darkness, whatever it is, if it meant being near you." Kaelin's chest tightened. Her courage and devotion were like a flame, both beautiful and dangerous. He knew the depth of the curse within him, the risk that every heartbeat posed to anyone he allowed close. Yet here she was, unafraid, willing to stand beside him. And he realized, perhaps for the first time in centuries, that he desired more than mere protection. He desired connection, redemption, and the fragile warmth that only Lysandra seemed able to provide. The night deepened, and with it, an uneasy calm settled over the field. Kaelin motioned for her to follow him to a quieter part of the castle grounds, away from the edge of the forest. There, in a hidden courtyard surrounded by high walls, the moonlight poured in like silver rain. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers, their fragrance mingling with the faint hum of magic. "Sit," Kaelin instructed softly. "Tonight you will learn some truths about me and the curse that binds me." Lysandra obeyed, her heart thudding with anticipation and fear. Kaelin lowered himself beside her, his gaze distant, reflective. "The curse I carry," he began, "is older than the kingdom itself. It has claimed many who drew too near. They were strong, brave, clever, but none were prepared for the weight of what I am." Lysandra's hand found his. "Then let me be prepared," she said quietly. "Teach me, help me understand." For a long moment Kaelin stared at her, the centuries of his burden mirrored in the shadow of his expression. Then slowly he nodded. Perhaps you are different," he murmured. "Perhaps you are the one who can walk beside me without being consumed." The wind stirred in the courtyard, carrying a soft whisper of voices that seemed to echo from the stones themselves. Kaelin felt it too, the stirrings of the curse, ancient and restless. It was not yet time for the final confrontation, but the threads of fate were drawing tighter, binding Lysandra and him together in ways neither could escape. As the night deepened, Lysandra rested her head lightly against Kaelin's shoulder. She felt the strength in him, the weight of centuries and the flicker of something softer beneath it all, a man who longed for connection, for redemption, for a soul brave enough to stand beside him. Kaelin, in turn, felt a shift within himself. To hold her was to acknowledge hope, a fragile, fleeting warmth that he had not dared to feel in lifetimes. Yet the shadows around them reminded him that the path ahead would not be gentle. The curse would test them. The world would challenge them. And the bond they were forging, delicate, luminous, and terrifying, would be tested in ways neither had anticipated. A sudden rustle came from the forest beyond the walls. Both of them froze. Kaelin's hand tightened around hers, protective and urgent. Shadows twisted among the trees, and the unmistakable sense of something ancient and malevolent stirred in the air. "You must be ready," Callan said, voice low and grave. "The night does not forgive weakness, and soon you will see just how deep the darkness runs." Lysandra met his gaze unwavering. "Then I will stand with you," she said, "no matter what comes." Callan exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and unease. The young Omega had made a choice, and in doing so she had stepped into a world of shadows, magic, and destiny, one from which there was no turning back. The moon climbed higher, and the castle walls seemed to hum with quiet power. Callan knew that this was only the beginning. The bond had been formed, fragile yet unbreakable, and the threads of fate were weaving their paths together. And in the shadows of the forest, a faint, whispering presence moved, watching, waiting. The curse had sensed the connection. It stirred, aware that its hold on the Alpha King was being challenged, and it would not yield without testing them both. The night closed in around them, and the young Omega and the Alpha King remained side by side, unaware that the dawn of their greatest trial was already approaching. The kingdom of Eldrath held its breath under a sky heavy with clouds, the sun dimmed by an unnatural haze that seemed to radiate from the castle itself. Within the ancient walls, King Callan moved silently, his shadow long and unyielding. The curse that had haunted him for centuries pulsed faintly beneath his skin, a dark heartbeat he could not escape. Every night, the whispers of the past grew louder, warning him that those who dared come near would face unimaginable danger. But Callan could not turn away from Lysandra. The young Omega had followed him into the heart of the castle grounds once more, drawn by a bond she did not yet fully understand. Each time she stepped closer to him, the threads of their connection tightened, weaving a tapestry of trust, longing, and unspoken understanding. "Callan," Lysandra whispered as they met in a secluded courtyard, the moonlight washing over them in silver streams. I feel that something is coming, something dangerous." Callan studied her, his piercing eyes reflecting the faint glow of the moon. "You sense it because you are tied to me," he said quietly. "The curse that haunts me also stirs around you now. It recognizes you, Omega, as the one who could either strengthen or shatter the bond that holds me." Lysandra's heart fluttered. She had always known she was different, that her kind, the Omegas, possessed abilities few understood. But she did not realize how deeply her power connected to Callan's fate. She placed a trembling hand over his. "Then teach me. Show me how I can help, how I can protect you." Callan's lips curved faintly, almost imperceptibly. For centuries, no one had offered him such devotion without fear or expectation. He knew the risk of allowing her near, yet he could not resist the pull of her courage. "You will need to be strong," he warned. "Stronger than you think. The shadows that seek me will not spare you if your heart falters." "I am ready," she said, her voice firm. "I will face whatever comes." Night fell fully, and the wind carried a coldness that chilled to the bone. Callan led her to the ancient courtyard at the edge of the castle, where stones carved with runes from an age long forgotten glowed faintly under the moonlight. Here, the magic of the old world was strongest, and here Callan had faced his greatest trials alone for centuries. "This place is sacred," Callan explained, his eyes scanning the edges of the courtyard. "It holds the power to contain darkness, but it cannot erase it entirely. You must be cautious." Lysandra nodded, absorbing every word. "I will follow your lead." For hours, Callan taught her to sense the currents of magic in the air, to recognize the subtle shifts that signaled the approach of shadows. Lysandra listened intently, her small frame trembling only once or twice as the weight of her responsibility pressed upon her. She was learning not only to protect herself, but to shield Callan from the curse that sought to isolate him from all who dared love him. Yet even as they trained, the shadows outside the courtyard stirred. Figures moved silently through the trees, pale and formless, testing the barrier that separated the castle from the dark forest beyond. Kaelin's jaw tightened. The curse was restless tonight, hungrier than ever. "You must be ready," he said, his voice low and commanding. "If it attacks, I may not be able to hold it alone. You will need to act." "I understand," Lysandra whispered. Her hands trembled, but determination shone in her eyes. She had learned to trust the king, to believe in the strength he had shown her. And now she would trust herself. As midnight approached, a ripple of darkness surged along the edges of the courtyard. A wraith emerged, its form twisting unnaturally, eyes glowing like coals. It hissed, a sound that clawed at the soul. Lysandra froze, but Kaelin moved before she could react. With a gesture of his hand, shadows recoiled from him, and the wraith screeched in fury. Kaelin's power flared, a brilliant light pushing the darkness back, yet the creature did not retreat entirely. It circled the courtyard, testing their defenses. "You will need to focus," Kaelin instructed, his voice calm despite the danger. "Your power can help contain it. Do not falter." Lysandra took a deep breath and reached within herself. She could feel the pulse of her Omega energy, a gentle hum of warmth and light that flowed in response to the darkness. She focused on the wraith, sending waves of calm and containment outward. The creature paused, its movements slowing under the influence of her magic. Kaelin's eyes met hers. "Good, hold it." The wraith hissed again, attempting to break free of the invisible bonds Lysandra wove. Kaelin stepped closer, his presence amplifying her power, guiding her focus. Together, they pushed against the creature, their combined energy creating a barrier of light and shadow. Slowly, the wraith dissolved into the night, leaving only the echo of its hiss in the cold air. Lysandra collapsed onto the ground, exhausted, but Kaelin caught her before she fell completely. He knelt beside her, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said, his voice soft. "But the night is not yet done." She looked up at him, breathing heavily. "I felt your power too, it's incredible." Kaelin's gaze softened, the weight of centuries pressing into a rare moment of vulnerability. "It is a curse," he murmured. "Power without control can destroy everything it touches. That is why I kept you at the gate. I feared the cost of letting you near me." Lysandra reached out and touched his hand, a silent promise passing between them. "Then let me stand beside you. Whatever comes, I will not run." Kaelin's chest tightened. For the first time in lifetimes, someone willingly chose to face the darkness with him, rather than away from it. He wanted to protect her, to shield her completely, yet he could not hide the truth from her any longer. "There is something you must know," he said quietly. "The curse is tied to the bloodline of the Alpha Kings. It seeks not only to protect the throne, but to isolate the king from all who might love him. Those who enter the castle under my shadow are tested, and many fail." "I am not afraid," Lysandra said, her voice firm. "I want to be tested. I want to prove that I can help you, not just watch from afar." Kaelin exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and tension in his chest. The young Omega's courage was rare, perhaps unmatched in the kingdom's history. He knew that by allowing her to face the trials ahead, he was taking a risk, one that could change everything for both of them. The night deepened further, and the castle itself seemed to hum with anticipation. Shadows moved in corners, whispers carried through the stone halls, and the ancient magic of Eldrath stirred as if aware that a bond stronger than fear was forming between Alpha and Omega. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the ground. Lysandra stumbled slightly, catching herself on Kaelin's arm. He looked toward the forest, his eyes narrowing. The curse was stirring more violently now, and the shadows were coalescing, forming shapes that were almost human but twisted in unnatural ways. "They come for you," Kaelin said, his voice low but urgent. "And if they succeed, we may both pay the price." Lysandra's grip tightened on his arm. "Then we fight," she said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. "Together." Kaelin nodded, the faintest flicker of hope appearing in his eyes. For the first time in centuries, he felt that perhaps the curse could be faced, not alone, but with someone who believed in him enough to stand beside him. The shadows surged forward, and Kaelin stepped in front of Lysandra, his aura blazing with power. She placed her hands on the stones beneath her, channeling her Omega energy to reinforce the barrier that surrounded them. Together, light and shadow intertwined, strength and courage blending to hold back the darkness. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The night held its breath as the two forces, the Alpha King and the young Omega, faced the full weight of the curse together. And in that moment, the bond between them became undeniable, unbreakable, and filled with a promise neither could yet name. But even as they held the darkness at bay, a whisper carried through the courtyard, faint but unmistakable. It spoke of trials yet to come, of shadows that could not be contained by courage alone, and of a destiny that would demand more than bravery. It would demand trust, sacrifice, and a surrender of the heart. Kaelin turned to Lysandra, his expression grave. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "The curse is testing us, and it will not stop until it breaks what it fears most, and what it fears is our bond." Lysandra met his gaze, unwavering. "Then I will not let it break us," she said. "No matter what comes." The wind howled through the courtyard, carrying the faint whisper of shadows that had not yet revealed themselves. The Alpha King and the young Omega stood together, side by side, ready to face the trials that would shape their destiny. And somewhere beyond the edge of the forest, a figure moved, a presence older and darker than the curse itself, watching, waiting, and preparing to test the limits of their courage, their trust, and their hearts. The dawn rose over Eldrath with a pale, trembling light, as if the sky itself hesitated to illuminate the events that were about to unfold. The castle of Kaelin stood silent, almost watchful, its spires cutting jagged lines against the fading darkness. The air was thick with the remnants of magic, a tension that made every stone and shadow seem alive. Kaelin moved through the halls with purpose, the weight of centuries pressing on his shoulders. The curse within him had grown restless after the trials of the night before. Shadows had whispered, testing their bond, probing the courage of both him and Lysandra. But he had survived, guided by the young Omega's steadfastness, and in her he had found a light that even the darkest magic could not extinguish. Lysandra waited at the edge of the courtyard, her breath forming small clouds in the cool morning air. She had not slept, she could not sleep. The memory of shadows twisting in the night and Kaelin's unwavering strength burned vividly in her mind. And yet, despite the fear and exhaustion, she felt an unshakable resolve. She had chosen to stand beside him, and she would do so until the end. Kaelin approached silently, his presence commanding yet softened by the moonlight still clinging to the stones. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low, carrying both warning and reassurance. "I am," Lysandra said firmly. "Whatever comes, I will face it with you." The wind stirred, carrying a whisper of power that made the hairs on their arms rise. From the forest beyond the walls, darkness swirled and condensed into a form more tangible than ever before. This was no mere wraith or shade. It was the essence of the curse itself, a presence that had haunted the bloodline of the Alpha Kings for generations. Its form was vast and shifting, a black tide rippling with red sparks of anger, its voice echoing in their minds. "You think you can escape me, Kaelin?" the darkness hissed, a sound like cracking ice and distant screams. "You belong to me. No bond can free you. No heart can withstand me." Kaelin stepped protectively in front of Lysandra, his aura flaring with light and shadow intertwined. "You are wrong," he said, his voice carrying over the surge of darkness. "My bond with her is stronger than fear, stronger than centuries of curse, and together we will end you." Lysandra's hands glowed faintly as she drew upon her Omega energy, channeling it into the courtyard stones beneath them. The runes carved into the ancient floor responded, glowing brighter, feeding her power and strengthening the barrier that separated them from the consuming darkness. She felt the pulse of Kaelin's strength at her side, a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. Together, they were a force the curse had not anticipated. The darkness surged forward, tendrils of shadow lashing toward them. Kaelin moved like a living storm, each gesture of his hands shaping the air into barriers and strikes of energy. Lysandra mirrored his movements with her own power, weaving waves of calm and containment into the night. The shadows collided with their defenses, hissing and screeching as they met the combined strength of Alpha and Omega. "You are stronger than I imagined," Kaelin murmured to her, his voice tight with both awe and urgency. "But this is only the beginning. The curse will not yield without resistance." Lysandra nodded, focusing all her energy. Her hands traced patterns in the air, binding the darkness to the glowing runes beneath their feet. The shadows shrieked in frustration, unable to penetrate the growing circle of light and magic that held them at bay. The curse coalesced into a singular towering form, its shape vaguely humanoid but jagged and distorted. Its eyes glowed with an ancient fury. "You cannot survive me together," it boomed, its voice shaking the stones themselves. "One must fall." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "No," he growled. "We do not fall, not while we are together." He reached out, taking Lysandra's hands in his. The connection between them surged, light flowing from her, shadows bending to his will, merging into a force neither could have summoned alone. The darkness recoiled, twisting and screaming as their bond radiated outward, a pure energy of trust, courage, and love. "You see," Kaelin whispered, "together we are stronger than anything that seeks to destroy us." The curse shrieked and lunged forward one final time, but Lysandra and Kaelin met it head-on. Light and shadow collided with the ancient darkness in a dazzling display. The runes beneath them glowed like stars, their power amplifying the energy of their union. Lysandra's heart beat in rhythm with Kaelin's, their souls intertwined, giving strength neither had possessed alone. Then, in a final, blinding moment, the darkness shattered. It exploded into 1,000 fragments, dissipating like mist in the morning sun. The curse had been broken. The long centuries of torment, isolation, and fear that had bound Kaelin were finally undone. Lysandra sank to her knees, exhausted, but Kaelin caught her immediately, pulling her close. She rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm free from the shadow of centuries. For the first time, he allowed himself to exhale fully, the weight of the curse falling away like chains. You did it," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "We did it together." Lysandra looked up at him, a faint smile on her lips, eyes shining with the triumph of survival and the joy of connection. "Yes," she whispered, "together." The first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, bathing the courtyard in warmth and clarity. The castle walls no longer seemed oppressive. Instead, they gleamed with a sense of renewal, as if the kingdom itself were breathing a sigh of relief. The air was lighter, the shadows softer, and for the first time in centuries, Kaelin felt that he could walk openly, unafraid, with another by his side. He held Lysandra close, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You belong beside me," he said softly, echoing the words he had spoken the night they first met. "Not at the gate, beside me, always." Lysandra's heart swelled. "And I will stay," she replied, her voice steady with conviction. "Beside you through everything." Kaelin's lips curved into the faintest smile, rare and genuine. For centuries, no one had spoken to him without fear, without reverence, without distance. Lysandra had done all three and yet had stood firm, refusing to be cowed by his power. She had given him something that he had thought impossible: trust, hope, and the chance for redemption. The kingdom of Eldrath seemed to respond. Birds took flight from the towers, singing in the new light of dawn. The trees swayed gently, as if bowing to the union of the two souls that had defeated centuries of shadow. Even the stones beneath their feet seemed to glow faintly, as though acknowledging the triumph of courage, bond, and love. Kaelin and Lysandra stood together at the highest tower, overlooking the kingdom. He wrapped a protective arm around her and she leaned against him, feeling a warmth and peace that had eluded her entire life. "The curse is gone," Kaelin said, almost in disbelief. "And yet I feel as though our journey has only just begun." "I know," Lysandra replied, "but whatever comes, we face it together. I trust you, Kaelin, and I know you trust me." He nodded, his gaze sweeping over the horizon. "Yes, I do. And for the first time, I believe that trust can be stronger than any darkness." The morning light grew brighter, illuminating the kingdom in hues of gold and silver. Kaelin lowered his head slightly, pressing a gentle kiss to Lysandra's forehead. It was not just a gesture of protection, but of gratitude, affection, and an acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them through trials and fear. "You have changed me," he murmured, "perhaps more than anyone in 1,000 years could have. You have brought hope to a heart that had long forgotten how to hope." Lysandra smiled softly. "And you have given me courage I never knew I had. You taught me that fear does not mean weakness, and that even in darkness we can find light." Kaelin's hand held hers tightly as they turned to look out over Eldrath. The kingdom had survived, the curse had been broken, and two hearts, once distant and burdened by fear, had been united by trust, bravery, and love. But as the wind whispered through the towers, carrying the faint scent of ancient magic and distant forests, a quiet thought lingered in both their minds. The shadows may have been defeated, but magic, destiny, and the mysteries of Eldrath would always remain. And with it came the promise that their bond, tested in fire and shadow, would endure, ready to face whatever the future held. For now, though, there was peace. And for Kaelin and Lysandra, that peace was not simply the absence of darkness. It was the presence of one another, standing side by side, stronger together than either could ever be alone. The castle gates, once ominous and forbidding, now felt like a threshold to a future filled with hope, trust, and a love forged through trials that had spanned centuries. And as the first light of day embraced them, Kaelin whispered again, almost to himself, "You belong beside me always." Lysandra smiled and pressed her hand to his chest, "And I always will." The wind carried their words into the sky, across the hills and forests, echoing a promise to the world, that even in darkness, courage and love could shine brighter than any curse.